Howdy folks, and welcome to the Hillbilly Kitchen. Today we're making peasant bread. Now this is a very simple version of yeast bread. It's just a basic yeast bread, and it is a no knead recipe. So you're not going to have to spend all day working on this. Now it is going to take about 3 hours to make it, so you know, kind of plan ahead a little bit, but it just takes a minute of actual effort. The rest of it's just waiting. What you need is 2 cups of all-purpose or bread flour, and I always use the unbleached flour. I just like it better. It does change the texture a little bit, but I think it has a more natural flavor. And you need 1 teaspoon each of yeast. I'm using regular dry yeast, not the quick stuff. I assume the quick stuff would work, but I have not tried it. A teaspoon of salt and a teaspoon of sugar, and 1 cup of warm water. That's it. That's all you need. Now there's lots of substitutions you can make, and I'm just going to add my yeast, my sugar, and my salt into my flour. Like, you can substitute a tablespoon or a teaspoon of honey or so for your sugar in your bread and totally change the flavor. You can substitute a cup of milk for the water, and that changes it. Check your water. You want it warm but not hot, and I check mine with my pinky. It's supposed to be around 100 degrees, and you just add that in to your dry ingredients and stir it. All you really need is a fork and a bowl to make this, and you can cook this in anything that will hold the dough. You can cook it in a loaf pan, you can cook it in the bowl you mixed it in, you can cook it in your iron skillet. I mean, if it'll hold it, you can cook it in it. You can divide it up and make rolls out of it. You can double the recipe and then divide it in half, of course, and make 2 loaves. I wouldn't recommend baking it, really doubling it, just baking it in one big loaf, because it kind of tends to fall on itself if you make it in too big of a loaf. But that's it. You just stir it up. See how quick that was before I could even finish telling you what the 4 simple ingredients were? It's done. Make sure you got all your flour out of the bottom, which I do, but there's no need to knead it and all that stuff. All we're going to do now is find a warm place and cover it, and we're going to wait about 2 hours or until it's doubled in size. Now you can mix this up early in the day and let it sit, and then bake it while you're cooking dinner. Bread now is like $4 a loaf for cheap stuff, and you can make homemade bread much less expensive than that. I mean, this, even with flour being $4 a bag, you could still make it for way less than $1 a bag. And even with the dollar bag, you can make it for way less than $1 a loaf. Fresh baked bread, not the cheapest store-bought bread, but you can have fresh baked bread for less than $1 a loaf, with the cost of the yeast and the flour and, you know, the other stuff in it. Now, if you want to explore some substitutions, I do have up an hour-long bread tutorial, and I talk about adding eggs and milk and how everything changes the texture and the flavor. You can watch that, and I'll link it in the end of this. Now, if you watch that, I didn't make a mistake in it. I said eggs are like gluten in your bread or something like that. What I meant is eggs act like gluten in your baking. They form the same kind of bond. Eggs do not have gluten in them, so if you watch that, don't come after me. I made a mistake. Eggs don't have gluten in them. They act like gluten in your baking. It's an hour-long tutorial, and you say stuff in an hour. But anyway, like I said, we're going to cover this. We're going to let it sit 2 hours. And we're going to let it sit another half hour before we bake it. So it's going to sit a total of about 2.5 hours. So if you're making this with dinner, you can kind of plan that around the timing of your dinner. And if you're making bread, you can pop a bread in a casserole in the oven at the same time, something like the pasta bake casserole we just did, or a regular hamburger casserole, or the dumped chicken casserole or something. And you can have fresh baked bread and dinner, at the same time, and impress everybody, and they'll think you just been working all day, but that's all the work. I mean, that's pretty much it right there. You're done working this. Anyway, let's cover it up and We're gonna see what it looks like in 2 hours, actually. Right here, I've already got it. In about 2 hours, it should be kind of risen up here. Oh yeah, and it's gonna look like this. Very jiggly, and that's the same dough right there. You can see how much it's gonna rise up in a couple of hours. I said you can bake this in anything. You can literally bake it in anything. You can bake it in what you mix it in. And I'm gonna bake this one in an iron skillet, and I'm just gonna put some butter in it to help it release when it's done, and that'll also help the crust a little bit. And there's all kind of stuff you can do to your crust too before you bake it. You can brush it and stuff like that with egg or butter or milk, but I'm just doing the basic here. And like I said, if you want more information on baking bread, I've got that hour-long tutorial that has all the different stuff in it that you can do. You can separate these and make rolls if you want to. If I was going to make rolls, I would probably put them in a muffin tin, because they kind of take the shape of what they're being baked in, or it kind of takes the shape of what is being baked in. And you can just take 2 forks if you're doing rolls and pull you off, you know, a roll size piece with your fork. You know, kind of like that. But I'm not making rolls. Anyway, just punch this down with your fork, and you could scrape this bowl here and add your butter in this bowl and bake it right in this bowl that you mixed it in. Or you could have mixed it up in your iron skillet and baked it right in your iron skillet. But anyways, we're going to dump this in whatever we're baking it in, and it doesn't matter, whatever you want to. And something about cooking in an iron skillet, it does add iron to your food. So if you've been told by a doctor that you need more iron, cooking in an iron skillet will help. And it's very good for pregnant women to eat in an iron skillet, because they pretty much always need more iron. Kind of shape it how you want it shaped, if you want to shape it, because we're not going to touch it anymore. And I just kind of want this to take the shape of my skillet just a tad. All right, good enough. No point in working ourselves to death. Whew. Now, again, we're going to cover this, and we're going to let it sit 30 minutes before we cook it. Now would be a good time to put your casserole together. And then you can put this in the oven with your casserole. This is one that I put in a loaf pan. Now this is not going to make a huge big old heaped over loaf of bread. It's going to come a whole lot closer to the top of the loaf pan than what it is now, because this has actually been sitting about 25 minutes maybe. You want to give it a good 30 minutes, and it's going to rise up more as it bakes. So it'll come close to the top of the loaf pan. It'll be a decent sized loaf if you bake it in a loaf pan. But I'm just going to cover this and sit it over here where it's warm, and let it sit for 30 minutes before it goes in the oven. Now preheat your oven to 350 degrees right before it gets done sitting for the 30 minutes. And you're going to put this in a preheated 350 degree oven for 30 to 35 minutes, and let it bake until it's nice and golden brown. And like I said, I'm not doing anything to my crust. There's all kind of stuff you can brush your crust with. You can brush it with butter, oil, egg, milk, and all of that changes the crust. But you can watch that hour-long video and get all kinds of stuff you can add in, or you can substitute or whatever to make your bread different. And in that video, I also tell you how to test your yeast. With prices being what they are, you might want to test your yeast. I am going to go over that real quick in case you don't know. Instead of throwing your yeast and your sugar and your salt in your flour, you can go ahead and throw your salt in your flour, but put your yeast and your sugar in your water and give it just a minute. And if it starts foaming, then your yeast is good, and then you dump that in your flour and your salt. But you can test your yeast before you actually add it to your flour. That way you're not wasting flour. And with prices being what they are, we don't need anybody wasting anything. I had used that yeast in the last week, so I knew it was good, and there was no need to test it. But if you want to test your yeast first, just mix your sugar and your yeast in your water, or your milk if you're using milk. And we're going to put this in a 350 degree oven for about, like I said, 30-35 minutes. And in 35 minutes, this is what our bread looks like. And you do want to have a rack to sit this on when you take it out, and you want to give it just a little while to cool. I told you can cook it in anything. I cooked this one in a little mixing bowl, kind of like one of the mixing bowls that I used, the one that I took the bread out of when we started here. But it's got cherries on it, and it's kind of cute. And that's a cute way to bake it, is in a bowl, because it's something kind of different. It is a simple bread. Because it's so simple, this is most likely the bread that all the common people ate. I mean, you know, you wouldn't have to spend all day making it. You could let it rise while you were working in your garden or whatever, because they didn't have time to spend an hour kneading bread. And, you know, they would have to just mix it up and go do other things. And they didn't have somebody to knead it for them and stuff like that. It is very, very good. And it will get you through some of these tough times. It'll save you some money. I said you can make it for less than $1 a loaf. And it's homemade bread. It is wonderful. And it's a very good recipe to learn with. It's a good recipe to do some substitutions on and see what flavors you like in bread. Now we want to let this cool just a minute in the bowl before we even try to get it out. And it will come out pretty easy once you let it cool for just a minute. Ideally, you want to let it cool for about 20 minutes before you cut it. But if you make fresh baked bread, good luck letting it cool for 20 minutes if there's people in the house, because everybody's going to want a slice with butter on it. And there is nothing in this world, I don't think, that tastes quite as good as fresh baked bread with just a little butter on it. So while we're waiting on this to cool, I want to share John 6:35 with you. And Jesus said unto them, I am the bread of life. He that cometh to me shall never hunger, and he that believeth on me shall never thirst. You know, in the Lord's Prayer, Jesus told us to pray daily. And one of the things he told us to pray daily for was our daily bread. And he wasn't just talking about grain and water or grain and milk. He was talking about him. We should pray daily that Jesus be a part of our lives. Daily, we need Jesus to walk with us. It's a daily prayer that Jesus be with us, not just for food, for our bellies. You know, Jesus also said, man does not live by bread alone. So when you say that prayer, keep that in mind, that it's a daily prayer for Jesus to be in your life, not just for you to have the things that you need. Anyways, let's see if we can get this out of here now. It's been a minute. Okay, there we go. It comes right out. Oh my goodness, look at all that steam coming off of there. Ugh, I hope y'all can see that on the camera. I mean, it's just steaming like crazy. And that is all there is to making it. And it comes right out. Just put the little butter in whatever you're cooking it in. Oh, it's so hot. It doesn't need slice this soon. But I want y'all to see what it looks like. My pretty cutting board that Vanessa got me that says put God first. She also sent me this bread knife. And I'm going to cut this really thick. Goodness gracious, it's so hot I can't touch it. I'm going to start with this side. If you cut it while it's this hot, don't put a lot of pressure on it. Do more sawing, because it's very, very soft. You can see how it's kind of given under the blade. Oh, mercy. Very hot. Burning my fingers. But look at that. You can see how nice that is. All the bubbles in it, the texture. It's going to be a really soft, tender loaf of bread with a nice crunchy crust on it. And it just don't get no easier than that for yeast bread. And you really can have fresh baked bread every day, yeast bread, And it's a fourth of the cheapest loaf of nothing bread you can get in the grocery store. So, you know, start making bread. It doesn't take all day. You don't have to sit there, like I said, and work it and knead it. And I had a lot of folks comment after the last video that they used to love to make bread, but they couldn't make it anymore because they were getting arthritis and they just couldn't knead it anymore. I understand that. Got a touch of it myself. But you don't have to do that to have fresh baked bread. You just let it rise. Instead of letting it rise an hour, you let it rise 2 hours. And that extra time, the yeast does the same thing that all your kneading does when you're kneading it. So you don't have to buy a $200 or $300 stand mixer, and you don't have to spend 30 minutes or longer kneading it. You can just let it rest a little bit longer. And while it's resting, you resting. Mix it up and go take you a big bubble bath, light some of them pretty scented candles, and just relax for a while and enjoy life. I want to thank you so much for joining us in the Hillbilly Kitchen. Try this bread. You're not going to believe it. If you haven't already, please don't forget to click like and subscribe before you leave. Share our videos with your friends, and until next time, remember to put God first.